Welcome to the WalterPicks Fantasy Football Show. Going to be diving deep into the Packers today. Excited to get into this one. This was a season that really went awry for the Packers last season, very, very early on with the injury to Jordan Love. Jordan Love still played most of the season, finishes QB 13 in fantasy points per game. Josh Jacobs absolutely smashed last year with 17.6 points per game in PPR, finishes a top 8 running back in fantasy. Marshawn Lloyd basically didn't play. I'm not actually sure if he played a single snap. He might have played like a few snaps, but he was basically injured throughout the season with a variety of different injuries, some of which had absolutely nothing to do with football. You know, a pretty unlucky rookie season for Marshawn Lloyd. Excited to talk about him a bit. And then the receivers were really start-sit nightmares all season long last year. And this was one of the teams that spread the ball out the most and had kind of too many receivers that were on the same sort of level within their own team. It was Jaden Reed, Christian Watson. We also had Dontavian Wicks and Romeo Doubs involved, Tucker Kraft, and even Luke Musgrave was involved at times last season as well. There were games where all of those guys I just said had at least 2 catches. I mean, it was really spread out at times. There was a really high ceiling at times as well. But the big thing to note about this team last season is the injury to Jordan Love. And if you guys remember, I think it was an ankle injury. If I recall, it happened in week 1 and he missed week 2 and week 3. And he came back in week 4 to play against the Vikings. And he still didn't look right in that first game. Still put up 31 points in that game. Was QB3, in week 4 last season in a shootout versus the Vikings. Then he missed, really only had like one good game down the stretch last year, finished with over 20 points once from week 11 to week 17. This team skewed really run heavy after the ankle injury. It's hard to know if that was the plan going into the season or a reaction to sort of protect Jordan Love from the ankle injury. I do think there's a potential that is the case, and they skew back a little bit more pass heavy this year. We're projecting a little bit more pass volume this year for the Packers than last season in the WalterPicks app. But Jordan Love, he only ended up having 3 games over 20 points. So despite finishing 13th in points per game, not really a guy you could rely on to win leagues. Last season, this year, the big change, they go out and draft a receiver in the first round in Matthew Golden, a guy that I was pretty low on before the draft, and I've started to warm up to a little bit more after the draft. Never had 1,000 yards in college. You know, one of these insane speed guys. There's some conspiracy out there about whether his 4.29 40 time was truly a 4.29 40 time and how the timers worked. And there's some conspiracy out there that I'm not personally buying into. The guy's insanely fast either way. But he didn't have the type of collegiate production you typically see from a round 1 receiver. He also was an early declare receiver, so he got 1 less year in college than what a lot of historical prospects get. He's just turning 22 years old now. But Christian Watson, on the other hand, he's going to be out for the first 3 months of the NFL season. Right now, in the WalterPicks app, we're projecting Christian Watson to be back. I think it is week 12 versus the Vikings this season is when we project Christian Watson to be back. That throws a really big wrench into trying to project this team. It's possible he's a little earlier than that, a little bit later, but in all likelihood, Christian Watson is going to be back and healthy before the fantasy football playoffs. And so now we throw a whole nother potential target earner in this offense after last season. I have mostly been wanting to avoid these guys, to avoid the same start-sit nightmare as what we saw last season. If I were to pick any of them, I think it's Matthew Golden, just this sort of unknown potential upside to maybe be the elite wide receiver we need in this offense. But Jaden Reed's, I'd say, the most likely guy to lead the team in targets. So a very mixed bag here for fantasy purposes. Real NFL, I think this will be, once again, one of the better offenses in the NFL. I want to start with Jordan Love, though. So last season, finishes QB 13, like I mentioned, only a few games over 20 points. Right now, Jordan Love is getting picked as QB 18 on Underdog, but QB 14 on Sleeper. Much different prices there. We have him at QB 17, a little bit closer to the Underdog side of things. Do you guys think the Packers skew run heavy again, sort of limiting Jordan Love's ceiling, or maybe the pick of Matthew Golden signaling a bit more pass volume to come? Seth, how are you approaching Jordan Love in fantasy?
Yeah, I kind of like his ADP, honestly. I mean, he's essentially another one of those guys like we talked about with Caleb Williams. Like, once everyone in your league drafts a quarterback, there's certain people that will not draft a second one, especially if they drafted an elite guy. So he may even just continue to drop back a little bit further. So that's the point where I like him. But I remember, I think it was a primetime game last year with the Packers, and they ran the ball, I think the first 8 or 9 times of the game, essentially with Josh Jacobs. The defense could not stop it, and they just scored a touchdown on the first drive of the game. I don't think they're necessarily running, in my opinion, because Jordan Love was hurt. It worked. Josh Jacobs was great. He scored a lot of touchdowns. The defense, I mean, I can't imagine playing defense against them when he's just turning around, handing off the ball, and they're scoring touchdowns. It's unbelievably like if you're a coach, yeah, let's keep doing that. So I think they're going to keep running the ball quite a bit, but I do like the potential. Him being healthy is a plus. So I think he's worth a shot. If you want to go with a second quarterback, definitely again, not a person I'd go as a starter. But if you do play in 2 QB leagues, I like the potential here. I don't think he can get too much worse. I think he brings you great weekly upside. So if it was coming to the fantasy playoffs, he is the type of quarterback that could drop 30 points. So in 2 QB leagues, I think he's a good upside pick. In 1 QB leagues, I think he's going to be a little bit more inconsistent and someone to grab as an upside play alongside another quarterback that you're a little bit more confident.
I'm not a huge proponent in drafting 2 quarterbacks if you get a top guy. If you're going for top 5, top 6 quarterback, I don't think you need to. If you wait for a Jordan Love, this guy's being drafted in the QB 15 to 18 range. That's next to guys like Justin Herbert, CJ Stroud, JJ McCarthy as well, Jared Goff. I think that's a fine price. You do have to understand that he probably won't run the ball a ton. His upside is going to be, I guess, a little bit lower because of that, but he does have some weapons. There's a ton of wide receivers on this offense, which I will get into and we will get into later. Josh Jacobs is a great running back. I've seen a ton of questions from him about him already this season. I think if you're getting him around the quarterback 17, 18, I'm fine with that ADP.
Yeah, for me, I won't be drafting Jordan Love probably at all across fantasy. He's going right behind Caleb Williams on Sleeper right now. I'm definitely taking Caleb Williams, and he's going ahead of Dak, Justin Fields, Drake May, JJ McCarthy. I probably would make a case for all those guys with potential ceilings over Jordan Love. I will say though, the one of the guys on this offense that doesn't have that start sit nightmare effect is Jordan Love, right? It doesn't matter to him which of these receivers is going off, and that is maybe a good segue into the receivers. We'll talk about Josh Jacobs and the running backs after, but to me, the really tough fantasy discussion and approach for this team is the wide receiver position. We talked about the Christian Watson injury and his potential return. Christian Watson and Matthew Golden are similar players. Matthew Golden is this insane speed, deep threat that seemingly is going to play a similar role to Christian Watson. I think his ceiling is a bit higher than that Christian Watson role, but we've seen Christian Watson smash in fantasy in the past, maybe not so consistently. Just to read you off Matthew Golden's comparable players we had in the NFL draft process, Percy Harvin, Ladd McConkey, and Curtis Samuel. So it paints a bit of a different picture than what Christian Watson can do, but I do think he's going to be capable of that Christian Watson role, but also just a bit more dynamic with the ball in his hands, like we saw from Percy Harvin back in the day, like we saw from Ladd last season. So there's a real ceiling here with that Ladd McConkey comp. So he's the only receiver personally that I'm going to be taking some stabs at if he falls. And I know in some high stakes drafts, just like in, the more casual home leagues, like some of these rookies just fall because people are not super in tune with the rookies. I'm definitely not going to let that happen with Matthew Golden. He was a first round rookie pick, does have some positive signals, but at the same time, man, I'm still recovering from the migraine that was this fantasy headache last season with these receivers. It was so obvious so early on that this was going to be rough for fantasy football. Good luck predicting which week it's going to be which receiver. And I still think Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, who we haven't even really talked about, they're going to be involved still to some extent too. And we're going to talk about Tucker Kraft at the end, who I'm also pretty bullish on, and maybe the most bullish after Josh Jacobs on this team. So yeah, I'm probably fading these receivers for the most part, unless Matthew Golden falls, but curious if any of these receivers stick out to you guys as potential targets. And I actually did just have my first season-long draft, a way too early first season-long draft. And I ended up taking Jaden Reed. It was a 14-team league. I think I got him around 6 or 7. He fell a little bit of an ADP trap for me. Again, I got to transition out of this best ball mindset where I do tether to ADP more since I'm doing such high volume. But Jaden Reed fell pretty far past ADP, so I'm going to have to deal with the headache with him there in that league this season. But yeah, curious what you guys think about these Packers receivers and the Christian Watson impact potentially too when he comes back.
The first thing you learn when you're talking fantasy football is don't try to predict the Packers wide receivers. You're just asking for trouble. And I kind of lean that way this year. I do like Matthew Golden. I actually thought the Cowboys might pick him in the first round. I like how he can line up in the slot. I like how he can line up outside. I thought that would have been a really fun. I know we've talked a lot of CeeDee Lamb and the Cowboys today, but I thought that would have been a really good matchup. And that's something I do think that he'll bring to the Packers is someone that can line up in the slot, someone that can line up outside, someone that brings that speed where, those are the kind of players in this new NFL that it seems like teams want to say, can I get the ball into their hands? Because it is absolutely incredible that at this high level that some players still look like they're playing against lower competition. And that's someone like Devon Achane, Jahmyr Gibbs, Jamison Williams, players like that are that fast, just make other people not look like professional players. And if Matthew Golden can bring that 4.29 speed to the NFL, they can get him the ball in the open field on a slant and he just runs away from everybody. I could certainly see them going back to that well. So that would be the only player that I'd go for is Matthew Golden. The price tag is essentially, I don't like to do this too much, but it's like when you can get them after you've drafted your starting lineup, I call them essentially free. Like it's very low risk. I don't love that Christian Watson is coming back and could take some of that role away. But I think with Christian Watson coming back week 12, Matthew Golden will have time to establish himself as the guy. Whether he does by then or not, we'll see. But I'm not super worried about that because he'll have that chance to establish himself as a must-go-to player. So definitely among the crowd, Matthew Golden will be the only guy I'd consider for the wide receiver.
And these wide receivers to me is so much of a headache. I almost just don't want to deal with it at all, even if they're at value. The Packers offense is full of gadget wide receivers and deep threats. I don't see a wide receiver 1X guy on this roster. It doesn't seem like it's possible. You look at the guys that are on this roster. You have Christian Watson, obviously will be out for a while. Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden. They also drafted Savion Williams. They still have Dontavian Wicks. They have Bo Melton. Some guys, they were giving 7th string wide receivers some reps last year. I don't see a world where there's a top 3 and that's it. I think Matthew Golden will be a value. I think Christian Watson could be a value when he comes back in the back third of the season. He's going to be undrafted. You could probably get him off the waiver wire when that time comes. There's no saying that he will be amazing after he comes back from his injury, though. Jaden Reed going as a wide receiver 44, wide receiver 50-ish. That's okay to me. There's going to be good weeks that he performs. If he's not a starting wide receiver on your team, coming off the bench, maybe that's fine. But I'm not reaching on any of these guys just because of that start-sit nightmare that I really do not want to deal with.
Yeah, that's totally fair. I'm really glad you brought up Savion Williams, the other receiver that they drafted in this NFL draft. Our player comp for him, which I think one of the best comps of the entire NFL draft, Cordell Patterson, where he is such a similar player to him, a very unique wide receiver, arguably a running back, not a wide receiver. So he's not going to be used in very many real wide receiver situations. It's possible he turns into the running back 2 or running back 3 on this team, or is used in the screen game. We are projecting a small target share for him. But just to talk to what we're projecting the WalterPicks app right now, target share wise for this team, we have Jaden Reed at 19% target share, Dobbs at 16%, Golden at 19%, Dontavian Wicks at 12%, Savion Williams at 4%, Tucker Kraft's at 15%. Not a single player we have over a 20% target share. And we have, when Christian Watson returns, we have him at a 10% target share, having the biggest impact on Wicks and Dobbs, and actually not changing the Jaden Reed and Golden target shares at all. And this is definitely, without a doubt, a pretty wide range of outcomes projection here. We're doing median projection. So that's where we landed with the median projections for this team. But yeah, Jaden Reed, we're right in line with ADP on him. But again, this is a median projection and doesn't account a ton for the headache, the start-sit headache you're going to have with him. Savion Williams gets involved. They also signed McCole Hardman this offseason, who could help play some of that Christian Watson role. I mean, they definitely have a speed addiction similar to the Miami Dolphins of the past. But yeah, I agree. These receivers are, I think, ones to avoid in fantasy football for the most part. And if you're going to take a stab, I think Golden has the highest ceiling, but I would not be surprised if Romeo Doubs ends up leading this team in targets. Like, that wouldn't be that shocking. If Tucker Kraft leads his team in targets, I wouldn't be that surprised. And so, yeah, it's really tough when you say that to buy in at the cost of all these receivers. But I want to segue to Tucker Kraft, who, outside of Josh Jacobs, is the guy I'm most excited about on this team. If I don't get one of these elite tight ends, like we've talked about earlier in the show, Tucker Kraft has the ceiling to join that elite tight end group. If he can just, if we can just get a little bit less Luke Musgrave on the field. Tucker Kraft last season, let me pull up some of his efficiency metrics for you just to paint the picture of what this guy could be with just a little bit more volume. And in the WalterPicks app right now, we have him projected as tight end 13. His underdog ADP is tight end 11. I think he's closer to tight end 13 in terms of the sleeper ADP. Last year, he was tight end 4 in touchdown rate with a 15% touchdown rate. In terms of yards per reception, Tucker Kraft led all tight ends in yards per reception with 14.6. The next highest was George Kittle at 14.2. Dawson Knox, who barely, played, was at 14.1. There was very few tight ends in the 14.6 range. It was on somewhat small, low volume, but he was 5th in YAC, 27 yards after the catch per game. And he had a 14% target share last year. Right now, we're projecting, I think I said 15%. If he can get, we have 5% target share right now to Musgrave. If he can just get a little bit more of that away from Musgrave, I think Kraft has at least a weekly tight end 1 overall ceiling, if not a top 5 ceiling for the season. And all offseason, there's been a steady drumbeat from the coaching staff that we got to get Tucker Kraft more involved. We got to get Tucker Kraft more involved. Caleb, our Packers creator, has made multiple videos pleading to the Packers organization, please just get Tucker Kraft more involved. Every single time they get Kraft involved, good things happen in this offense. And he has the size adjusted speed that we see from these elite tight ends in fantasy football. He reminds me, honestly, a lot of George Kittle, maybe with a little bit less blocking ability. So the ceiling's there, but he's still part of this receiving room that is so inconsistent that I don't want to be too ahead on Tucker Kraft, but definitely I think a guy that's a good late round tight end pick. He's going outside the top 10 tight ends right now in fantasy. Curious, Avery, what do you think about Tucker Kraft for fantasy?
I like the idea of Tucker Kraft a lot. There's so many mouths to feed, and this ball is going to go so many ways on the offense. Tucker Kraft was relatively inconsistent as far as the target share goes. Some games he'll have 6 targets, which wasn't a ton. Some games he'll have 4. Some games he'll have 2. He did have a decent amount of touchdowns, though. His red zone utilization was not bad. When you look at his red zone target rate, he was the tight end 11 in that. He had about 1 per game. But yeah, 15% touchdown rate, tight end 4. That is pretty amazing as far as his usage on the field. I think his price, where he is around the tight end 13, is fine. You look at who he's going next to. It's guys like Dalton Kincaid, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren. I don't know if I would take him over some of those guys, but you have Zach Ertz, Jonnu Smith, Dallas Goedert on the other side. I think grabbing Tucker Kraft above those guys is perfectly fine to me. He's one of those guys as a tight end who is more or less penciled in to get some kind of target share, again, as long as he remains as the number 1 receiving tight end on that team, which I think is possible.
And I got 2 words for you, Sam. Tush push. He was their guy last year. I know everyone complained about the Packers trying to ban this play, but they ran it 2 or 3 times last year, 100% successful. It failed 0 times for them. And Tucker Kraft was the guy who was taking the ball on 4th and 1. If you put him on the goal line and Tucker Kraft is getting a Jalen Hurts like rushing, that is absolutely just insane, like never seen before in fantasy football. So that's like on the dream side of the situation. But you look at the YAC 5th, and that's not yards per YAC per reception, right? That's right. YAC per game. That's a per game stat for a guy that's not getting a lot of targets. Wasn't getting the ball that much. That shows how good he is after the catch. I mean, you look up some of his highlights. He is a bulldozer. People are bouncing off this guy. And it's a guy that, for me, I go crazy on tight ends at the end of this draft. I in several of my drafts, especially my mock drafts, I go Loveland, I go Warren, I go Tucker Kraft. I grab all 3. My wide receivers are set at that late point in the draft. My running backs are set. I have a quarterback, and I load up. And one of those guys, I just feel strongly, at least one of them is going to work out. And Tucker Kraft is another guy. I just don't want my league mate to get this guy because I see the potential. He's not someone that I want to ever lose to this season because I already see how good he can be. So he's a guy I'm drafting every time I get a chance.
Yeah, love the tush push shout. That would be a Taysom Hill like upside for Tucker Kraft if that were to come to fruition. Definitely had not considered that, but it is the tush push is something that I feel strongly every NFL team should have a tush push formation like a special teams play. There's no excuse for NFL teams to not be getting 4th and 1s in today's NFL. And it's actually pretty shocking how few teams have figured out how to do the tush push. Yet I get that the Eagles offensive line and Hurts is really good at it. You can build a roster just for that play where you have the tush push squad. And for the Packers, it could be Tucker Kraft. Like I would go as far to say as NFL teams should consider finding a guy just for this play. If you can always convert 4th and 1s, it's an absolutely massive advantage in the NFL. We saw it with both teams. Obviously, the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, like huge reason for their success. They don't have 4th and 1s, basically. They're just first downs for them. Every team should be doing that. I do think we'll start to see more and more teams adopting it. The smarter teams going first. I would probably put the Packers in that group. So yeah, definitely something to watch if Tucker Kraft's going to get rushing touchdowns this season. All right, so we're going to do a quick draft or pass. Let's start with the wide receivers. It seems like most of us are passing on them. I would put a potential draft on Matthew Golden, depending where he falls. But in general, I'm passing on the wide receivers. Again, I'm still recovering from the headache from last season. I think you guys both agree. I want to jump to Josh Jacobs, though, because we haven't talked a bunch about him. I said we would do him at the end. And I'm curious if you guys are drafting him where he's going. Marshawn Lloyd is the presumed backup right now on this team. We saw the other backups, Emmanuel Wilson, Christopher Brooks, fill in last year behind Josh Jacobs. They both did decent. Marshawn Lloyd, though, he was, I think, a 3rd-round pick, 2nd or 3rd-round pick in the NFL draft, expected to be, the clear running back too. Let me pull up exactly where he got picked last year in the NFL draft. Yeah, he was a 3rd-round pick in the 2024 NFL draft. He was seemingly a capable receiver, pretty efficient rusher in college, 93rd percentile size adjusted speed. I still think he's going to be running back 2 on this team after a pretty unfortunate rookie season, that a lot of which wasn't really his fault. And none of the injuries I don't think are really lingering into this year. But Josh Jacobs, to me, he's like really close to that end of the elite running back tier. And he's going in a pretty exciting spot in fantasy drafts, like at end of the 2nd round, beginning of the 3rd round. You're getting a guy who really just doesn't have bad fantasy games. He had 1 game all season last year under 10 PPR points. He went for a 5-game stretch towards the fantasy football playoffs, over 20 points per game in 5 games in a row, scoring almost every single game, elite touchdown ceiling. He's a capable receiver too. Like him, he's maybe the only guy kind of insulated from this tough wide receiver room for fantasy. So yeah, I'm in on Josh Jacobs personally. I'm drafting Josh Jacobs at his running back. What is it? 8 cost. I think he's going. Let me pull this up to be exact. Yeah, right now he's getting drafted at running back 9 on Sleeper, running back 10 on Underdog. We got him at running back 11, but yeah, I'm very comfortable taking him right in the back part of the 2nd round, middle of the 2nd round, even if running backs are going to go crazy in your drafts. How about you, Seth? Are you drafting or passing on Josh Jacobs?
This one's tough because it's all about roster construction for me with the first 3 picks. And he lines up really well with the Bijan and the Saquon in round 1. And I don't know if I don't want to miss out on wide receivers in round 2 and 3 if I did start off with an elite running back. So it's really going to depend on how that lines up the rest of my draft. But if I do start with a wide receiver like CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, or Jamar Chase, definitely would be drafting Josh Jacobs in round 2. If he fell to round 3, I don't care who else I have. He's joining my team. But I'd consider him in round 2, definitely, if I start off with a wide receiver.
The interesting thing about Josh Jacobs to me, I've had way more questions about him as if I should draft or not so far this season than I expected. He had 12 touchdowns in the last 8 weeks of the season after the bye week and was averaging well over 4 yards per carry. He was extremely efficient. You look at where he's being drafted, around RB 9 through 11, depending on what site you use. I could see him going above those guys. You look at who's ahead of him. You have Christian McCaffrey. If he's dealing with injury, which again we can't predict, I'm okay. I could see a world where you take him over him. Chase Brown, I'd probably still keep. You have Jonathan Taylor, Bucky Irving, possibly Kyron Williams, and then Josh Jacobs there. I could see Josh Jacobs finishing above all of those guys. The offense is more or less curated for Josh Jacobs to succeed. I think his rushing touchdown upside is 100% going to stay. He does get involved in the receiving game. It's not as consistent as we would like, but we've seen what he can do when he was on the Raiders. He was perfectly fine in the receiving game, relatively efficient as well in that. So I think that can continue with a healthy Jordan Love.
Yeah, definitely a reasonable take. And then in terms of the backup running backs, I'm curious if you guys have any take here. I've been taking some stabs on Marshawn Lloyd in the last round of underdog drafts. Seemingly would have a pretty high ceiling if Josh Jacobs were to go down. I don't think there's going to be a ton of standalone value here. There's also definitely a real chance here, though, in this backfield that it's a 2 or 3-way split if Josh Jacobs were to go down across Emmanuel Wilson, Christopher Brooks, and Marshawn Lloyd. I think Lloyd's got the highest ceiling of the group. I don't know. Do you guys have any takes on the backup running back situation? Any of these guys, especially in deeper leagues, worthy of handcuff potential?
I really liked Lloyd last season before all the time that he spent off the field. I really thought if he was healthy, he could be a pretty decent handcuff. if Josh Jacobs were to get injured this season, I wouldn't see a world where he would be a clear-cut RB1. I just don't think that's how it would work, especially with how Emmanuel Wilson looked last season when he was in. They're not guys that I think we need to run and get unless you're in a super, super deep league.
Marshawn Lloyd last year, there was a lot of fear after he was drafted about Josh Jacobs. Everyone was really afraid. And I think a lot of that's just been forgotten about. I don't think those thoughts were wrong. So honestly, I think if you're in a deeper league, Marshawn Lloyd is worth a shot. I think he's free enough that if you like him, he's worth a shot at the end of your draft, like last pick guy, someone to save on the bench, because I don't know about you, but if you don't play with Fab, I don't plan on being in last place. So if there was a Josh Jacobs injury, you're never getting Marshawn Lloyd. So you got to roster players like that from the beginning of the season. I don't want to spend all my Fab on a player like Marshawn Lloyd. So that if you do believe in it, or if you have Josh Jacobs, I think he's worth a shot, but that would be the only one of the group.
Yeah, we have right now the backfield split pretty evenly across those three backup running backs. Marshawn Lloyd, Emmanuel Wilson, a bit ahead of Christopher Brooks, but we have them all with at least a small role in the projection, with Josh Jacobs getting 70% of the backfield. That is a wrap for our team by team, player by player, really, analysis in the NFC North. Definitely a loaded division. If you just draft players from this division, you're probably avoiding the milk mile. You might even have a chance to win your league. So definitely an exciting division to start with. Before we wrap up, I did want to just talk a little bit about what this show is going to be about, what we're going to tackle in later episodes, and what you can expect from us, your hosts, throughout the season. And our goal with this fantasy show is to help you win fantasy football leagues. That is mission number one, to give our perspective on fantasy football and the do's and don'ts that we're following in our competitive leagues. And for me personally, I also want this show to be a way to give deeper insight into the WalterPicks app, what we're projecting, why we're projecting it, which is often very difficult to communicate within the app itself. So you got a little bit of a flavor of that in this episode, but there'll be more of that. We'll be deep diving into my do not draft list on this show. We're going to be going team by team through the rest of the divisions in season. We're going to do a game by game breakdown after the week, likely to be posted Monday or Tuesday every week of the NFL season, looking back at the previous week's games, things we learned from the previous week that we are adjusting our fantasy takes for moving forward. Fantasy football is a game of learning from the most recent information, not overreacting, but not underreacting. We'll be doing our best to do that on this show throughout the season. And then we'll also have an episode every single week of the NFL season, looking ahead game by game and talking through what we expect to happen in the upcoming games and players that we're avoiding or targeting, starting or benching across our fantasy rosters. We'll have player prop takes throughout the season as well. Maybe even a little DFS analysis sprinkled in. But in terms of draft season, I mean, we're going to be talking an ungodly amount about fantasy football drafts between now and September 5th. We'll cover pretty much every single angle you could need covered to dominate your fantasy leagues. This is, no pun intended, it's going to be no BS takes here on the fantasy football, the WalterPicks Fantasy Football Show. And we are going to be, giving our best and most valuable insights from across the fantasy football landscape. So pumped to have Seth and Avery a part of this show this year. And this show will extend to my Sunday morning live stream. We'll likely have live streams during the other primetime games from members of the squad. When I very first started in the fantasy football content creation space back in college as a writer, I actually did have a podcast in college. It's called the Pigskin Perspective Podcast. One of our former Cowboys creators, Luke Pagoni, was a member of that with me. The very first episode we recorded back in my college days, we forgot to hit the record button. Didn't record the entire first episode. So I'd say this went better than that. It's only up from here. And yeah, really pumped to be getting after it with you guys.